The Man Next to You. Original stories of ordinary people in extraordinary hours. The ones history forgets to name. Season 3, The Hot Land. Episode 4, Water. PFC Moses Tate carried water up the ridge and carried the dead back down, and somewhere in the middle of the first week he stopped being able to tell which load was heavier. He had not come to the Pacific to carry water. He had come, in his own mind, to be a Marine, which had cost him more than the white boys could know to become at all, and the Corps, having let him in, had put him where it put nearly all of them, in a depot company, a labor company, hauling ammunition and supplies, the muscle behind the rifle line. The official word was that men like Tate would not be in the fighting. The official word, like most official words about that island, did not survive contact with the place. On Pelulu, the front was wherever you were standing, and a working party hauling cans up an exposed ridge under a sniper's eye was as much in the fight as anybody, and the depot companies bled for it and carried the wounded out under fire and picked up rifles when the line was hit, and most of the books would forget to mention it. Tate did not carry water for the books. He carried it because men died without it, and because somebody had to, and because he had decided a long time ago, back home in a harder school than this one, that the measure of a man was not where they made him stand, but how he stood there. You with me, Tate? That was Sutton, ahead of him on the path, bent under his own cans. Almost to the top. Don't look up at the ridge. Look at my heels. I'm looking at your ugly heels, Sutton. Lord, keep walking. The cans weighed 40 pounds full, and there were two of them, one in each fist, and the path up to the rifle line on the ridge was 400 yards of broken coral that went almost straight up in places, in heat that came off the white rock like the open door of a furnace. That was the arithmetic of it, the brutal sum Tate did with his body 20 times a day. 40 pounds in each hand, 400 yards, straight up, 115 degrees. A sniper somewhere in the ridge who had all day and had ranged the path, and at the top, men who needed the water more than Tate needed to keep breathing, because the water was the only thing keeping the rifle line on the ridge alive, not the bullets, the water, because a man down from thirst couldn't pull a trigger, and the heat was knocking Marines flat faster than the enemy was, and the water itself was a kind of cruelty. The first water ashore had come in oil drums that hadn't been cleaned, and it came up the ridge brown and slick and stinking of diesel, and men drank it because there was nothing else, and then brought it right back up, which dried them out worse than not drinking at all. Tate carried it anyway. You carried what there was. Later there'd be cleaner water, and he'd carry that. But the first terrible week, it was the foul stuff. And he watched men weep with gratitude over water that made them sick, because being sick with water was still better than dying without it. He went up the path. He did not look at the ridge. He looked at Sutton's heels, and he prayed steadily, not for himself. Tate had made his peace with the sniper, more or less, the way you had to, but the old prayers from his father's church, said low under his breath in time with his steps, not asking for anything. Just keeping company with something larger than the pampas and the heat and the 40 pounds in each fist. The squad at the top of the path was a rifle squad anchored by a big sergeant named Bellamy, and they were in a bad way when Tate's working party came over the lip with the cans, gray-lipped, hollow, a couple of them down and not from wounds, just down, cooked flat by the heat. And Tate saw the thing he always saw, the first day, with new units, the way the white Marines' eyes went to him and then went away. Not all of them, but enough. The flick of the eyes, the small recalculation, the not quite looking at him that he had been reading on face his whole life and had gotten so good at reading that he no longer let it cut him mostly. He set the cans down where the wounded from heat were lying, and he started doing what he could, lifting a man's head, wetting his lips, the small, ordinary mercies. And he felt the squad's eyes on him, weighing the way men weigh a stranger who's turned up in their hole. It was the sergeant who broke it. Bellamy came over, filthy and burned dark by the same sun, And he didn't flick his eyes away, and he didn't make a thing of not flicking them away either. He just looked at Tate straight, the way you'd look at any Marine, and he looked at the cans, and he looked at the 400 yards of open coral path Tate had just carried them up under the sniper's eye, and something moved in his burned-out face. You carried that, up that path, in this. It wasn't quite a question. Twice already this morning, Sergeant, Tate said. Be a third time after I catch my wind. What's your name? Tate, Moses Tate. Sergeant Bellamy. And the sergeant put out his hand, his filthy hand, and Tate looked at it for half a second, because not every white sergeant on that island would have. And then he shook it, the two of them standing on the ridge in the furnace heat, and Bellamy said, loud enough that his squad could hear it, loud enough that it was plainly meant for them to hear it. Listen up. This man and his people just walked water up that path through a sniper's front yard so you sorry specimens can keep breathing. People are going to write about the riflemen on this ridge. Nobody's going to write about the water. But there's no rifleman without the water, and there's no water without somebody carrying it up here on his own two hands through hell. You treat these men like the Marines they are. You hear me? Aye, Sergeant, the squad said, ragged, and the eyes that had flicked away came back, and Tate felt the thing shift, the small thing, the thing that mattered more than the books would ever know. It's nothing, Sergeant, Tate said low, because the size of it had embarrassed him. It's water, Bellamy said. On this rock, there's nothing bigger. Don't let anybody tell you you were in the rear. There's no rear on this island, Tate. There's just the men carrying and the men carried. And today you're carrying. That's the whole war. He went down the path with a worse load than water, because that was the other half of the job, the half nobody mentioned when they said labor company, the half that put the gray into Tate's nights for the rest of his life. You carried water and ammunition up, and you did not go back down empty. You went back down carrying the men who couldn't walk, the wounded, strapped to litters or slung between two carriers, jolting down the broken coral toward the waterline and the tractors. And you carried the others, the ones past the corpsman's help. Because on that ridge there was nowhere to leave a man who'd been killed, and you did not leave him, you did not ever leave him. You brought him down off the rock so the island couldn't keep him. And that work fell to the working parties, to Tate and Sutton and their people. And so Tate learned the weight of it, the particular terrible weight of a man who has stopped helping you carry him. He carried a boy down that first afternoon, a Marine from Bellamy's squad's flank, no older than the 17-year-old the sergeant kept close. And the boy was gone, and there was nothing to do for him but the one last thing, which was to not leave him on the ridge. And Tate carried him down the 400 yards as carefully as if he could still be hurt, because that was the only dignity left to give, and Tate would be damned before he'd give it carelessly. You knew him? Sutton asked at the bottom. No, Tate said. Didn't know his name. Carried him anyway. He set the boy down gentle at the collection point by the sand. That's the part I can't. You carry a man you never met, you never said one word to, and he's the heaviest thing you ever held. And then you got to put him down and go back up for the cans. He wiped his face. Lord, back up for the cans. Back up for the cans, Sutton agreed, and they turned and started up the path again. Into the heat, the sniper's front yard, the furnace, the next 40 pounds in each fist. By the end of the first week, the squad on the ridge knew him by name, and that was its own kind of pay, the only kind that mattered. It happened the way it happens, not in a speech but in the small things accumulating. Tex, the squad's joker, started saving Tate a flat rock in the shade of the position for when he came over the lip, the Tate seat, reserved, no riffraff. The boy Keefe fell in beside him on a water run one afternoon, just to talk, asked him where he was from, and meant the asking. Bellamy made sure every time that the working party got a few minutes in what shade there was, and a pull of the cleaner water. When there finally was cleaner water, you carried it, you drink first. It was nothing. It was everything. It was men deciding, one ridge and one bad week, to see each other, and Tate knew exactly how rare and how costly that seeing was, and he didn't make a speech about it either. He just kept carrying. And once, Only once, but it was the thing he'd tell decades on, the one story he'd let out of the locked room. The line on the ridge got hit hard at dusk, a sudden push out of the caves, and the rifle squad was stretched too thin and going under. And Tate and Sutton and their working party were right there with empty cans and a few carbines between them. And there was no question about it and no time to have a question. They dropped the cans and picked up what they had and fell in on Bellamy's line and helped hold the ridge until it steadied. Nobody ordered it. Nobody wrote it down. When it was over, Bellamy looked at Tate across the smoking coral, breathing hard, and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that the standing shoulder to shoulder hadn't already said better. "There's no rear on this island," Tate said, giving the sergeant his own words back. And Bellamy almost smiled, the first one Tate had seen on him. "No," Bellamy said, "there surely is not. Now somebody's going to need water in about 5 minutes, Marine. Reckon you better go back down for the cans." "Reckon I better," Tate said, and went. He carried water on that island until the ridge was finally taken, weeks of it, up with the cans and down with the wounded and the dead. The path exactly as deadly the 100th time as the first, the heat never breaking, the work never done. He went home, the ones like him who got to go home, to a country that had asked him to bleed for it and would make him wait a long while yet to be seen by it, the way Bellamy's squad had learned to see him in one hard week on one hot ridge. He got older. He almost never spoke of it. But on the bad nights, what came back to Moses Tate was not the sniper or the push out of the caves. It was the weight. The 40 pounds in each fist going up, in the worst weight coming down. The boy he never knew carried down 400 yards as gentle as he knew how. Because somebody had to. Because you do not leave a man on the rock. Because the measure of you is how you stand where they make you stand. "You take care of the man next to you," the sergeant used to say up on that ridge. And Tate had carried the man next to him and the man he never met, in the living and the dead, up and down all week, all that long, hot week. And that, not the medals he didn't get and the books that forgot him, that was the thing he'd done that he knew in the locked room of him was worth a whole life. It was just water, he'd say, if anybody asked, which they mostly didn't. But it wasn't. On that rock, there was nothing bigger, and he had carried it. You've been listening to The Man Next to You. These people are fictional. What they carried was not. If this story stayed with you, leave it where someone else might find it, and come back next week for the next one. Until then, take care of the man next to you.